All right, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Owls Perch. I'm joined today by 2010 rowing alum Jenny Sichel. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenny. It's great to see your smiling face again. It's been a while.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to get
Yeah,
to that today.
yeah, for sure. I think our fans will definitely love it. So I want to jump right in. I don't want to waste any time because I think we're gonna spend a lot of time talking. But I wanted to, for people who don't know you well at all or anything like that, wanted to kind of go all the way back to pre-Bryn Mawr days and talk a little bit about your athletic career prior to coming to Bryn Mawr. What kind of stuff did you do in high school? What athletics were you involved in high school?
So I was involved in a lot in high school. I started out with like three major sports, and you might say like, well, marching band isn't a sport, but I beg to differ. So in the fall, I was doing marching band, and then basketball in the winter, and then softball in the spring. And throughout high school, I kind of took on like rock climbing, figure skating, really anything that was athletic that could be considered athletic, I was a part of. And so my main two sports were marching band and softball by the time I graduated. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting path as to how I came into rowing. But yes,
Yeah,
that was like my main thing. I was very much like queen of the band geeks with marching band, and twirled the baton, played clarinet, and then led the band my senior year as drum major. So
that's fantastic. That's pretty prestigious. And for anyone who says marching band is not a sport, I don't think you've seen how much marching you
have
actually.
you seen Ohio State? Like that's how we did high stepping, and like it's legit. I was in the
Yeah,
best shape of my life.
there is definitely some aerobic activity going on with that, and you have to breathe into your clarinet at the same time. So I'm 100% on board with you calling that a sport.
Love it.
Perfect. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about how you got into rowing. What brought you to Bryn Mawr? And like, what was your college search experience like? What were you looking for, and how did you end up at Bryn Mawr?
So I actually started out looking in the Princeton Review, and I was looking for schools that were rated 94 or above for academics. And Bryn Mawr was actually rated higher than Harvard at the time. And so I was like, well, I guess I can apply there. Like, I mean, it is all women. Like, I don't know if I'll like that, but it's a smaller school. I came from the second largest school in New Jersey. We had like, I think I'm going to botch this, but like 4,300 students, something like
Wow.
that. My graduating class was like 900 around there. And so I wanted to go to a smaller school, and I applied to a bunch of schools, ended up getting into probably four or five schools, Bryn Mawr included. And so I actually I went for an interview, and then went for kind of like a campus tour. And what sealed the deal for me was it was a rainy day, and I was the only one in the admin office. Um, and they were like, normally any other school would have been like, oh yeah, you're the only one, like we'll probably cancel. But somebody actually took me on a tour of Bryn Mawr's campus with the umbrella, and it was just so peaceful and quiet and just nice, and it just felt like home. And so it literally in one trip moved from the bottom of my list to the top of my list. And actually, I'll tell you a funny story about. So I know Haverford is right down the street, and I was thinking of applying to Haverford. And I went to kind of look the same day I went to visit Bryn Mawr. And I walk into what looked like an auditorium, and I was like, wow, this is really small, like a theater or something. And I'm like, wow, this is really small. And then I saw like some younger like boys walking around, and I was like, this is really weird. I don't like Haverford. And it turns out I went to the Haverford School and not
Oh
Haverford
no.
College. And so that's why I didn't apply to Haverford, and I ended up going to Bryn Mawr.
Well, I guess they'll have to be a little better at labeling their campuses apart from each
Or
other,
I
right?
just need to learn to read.
All right, fair
Um,
enough. Fair
I
enough. We
was a
won't
math
ding you
major
for
for a
that.
reason. No.
Fair enough. Okay, so you didn't really mention athletics. Obviously, you said you played softball in high school and a lot of
Mhm.
stuff. That's not something Bryn Mawr had available to you. Were you considering athletics when you chose Bryn Mawr? How did that factor into things?
So I was really dedicated in my academics, and I could have probably walked on to D1 softball college, and was kind of bummed that Bryn Mawr didn't have softball. So I was actually, in the summer before, reached out to the soccer coach because prior to high school, I had played soccer for 10 years. And I had all the qualifications ready, except by the time we kind of got talking, it was a little too late. And so at that point, I mean, I had already accepted Bryn Mawr, knew I was going, was bummed they didn't have softball or marching band, but was like, oh, I'm going to play soccer. It's going to be great. And reached out to the soccer coach. It was too late. And they were like, oh, it'll be an extra $100 for preseason training. And I was like, nope, not going to do it. I'll go like join the crew team or something.
So how did you get connected to crew then?
Well, there were two sports that you could walk onto, never having done them before at the time at Bryn Mawr. One was badminton and one was rowing.
Okay.
And I'd always wanted to try rowing. So I actually like saw someone wearing a Bryn Mawr crew jacket getting their mail and was like, hey. And they're like, Jenny, like you're 5'2" 3/4 and weigh 110 pounds. Like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, just go try the rowing machine. And I did it and they were like, oh, okay, you're pretty strong. You're going to be a rower. And so that's how I got started in rowing at Bryn Mawr. And after the first erg test, I was like, I don't know if you've ever rowed before or done the erg machine, but it is very difficult if you don't pace yourself. And I didn't pace myself. And needless to say, I was like definitely loud as I was finishing my 2K and scared the next person.
Okay.
I was gonna go. So, but I did it. And that's how I got started with rowing at Bryn Mawr.
That's amazing. So you originally started, and I'm gonna butcher this, but you originally started as one of the rowers, right?
Yeah.
And you were kind of one of the rowers on the boat, but that's not how you ended your career, right? Talk about that training.
Yeah, so I actually started out and made varsity my freshman year, my first year rowing, raced in the varsity boat in a couple of the races. And then sophomore year, I was still a rower, and actually one of the major regattas is Head of the Charles each fall. And I actually ended up stroking the boat, so like setting the pace for the boat at Head of the Charles that fall, the varsity boat. Wow. And then that following spring, I was in the boat and felt massive pain in my back and my leg during one of the strokes. And it turns out that I had injured my back while rowing. And so I didn't know if it would get better, gave it a little time, ended up that I wasn't able to row competitively anymore. So I switched over to coxing, which is the little person that shouts in the boat. Except we do way more than that, but.
Absolutely. So how hard was that transition for you? How long did it take you to figure out kind of what coxing was all about?
So I think because I was able to row in the varsity boat my freshman year, and we had a fantastic experienced coxswain that year, I learned a lot from her as a rower. And I also knew what sort of commands I wanted to hear and what would motivate me. And so it actually was a fairly seamless transition, other than like during the not sure if I'm going to cox, not sure if I'm going to row process. But yeah, once I like dedicated to coxing, I'm rather bossy to begin with and like talking a lot if you haven't figured that out yet. And so it was pretty easy for me to switch over to coxing. And in fact, at one point in my rowing career, I was told to talk 80% less. So
how did that feel?
It was a bit of a blow. But after taking it personally and then realizing I probably shouldn't take it personally, it was actually probably the greatest piece of advice I've ever received as a coxswain.
That's fantastic. And I've never thought about the perspective that you had coming from someone who was a rowing and knowing what you wanted to hear. That's a great perspective. So that's really cool to hear. What are some of your favorite memories from your time as a Bryn Mawr rower? Was there a favorite regatta you had, or one moment that really sticks with you when you think back to it?
You know, I think one of my favorite memories was actually so I have a couple, but I think one of my favorite ones or favorite regatta, I don't know what you want to say, but it was my first regatta coxing for Bryn Mawr. And as a coxswain in the spring, and as a coxswain, you actually have to steer the boat as well. So there's a little rudder underneath the boat. And then I turn the boat basically using a string from the coxswain seat. And it's actually really challenging to keep a boat straight, like going on a straight line. And so my first race, we had a straight buoyed course that was 2,000 meters long, and you have to like go directly down the center of the course for the shortest line. And I decided I was going to ping pong back and forth in the course. Uh, and we still got third. So
That's
was
pretty
like,
amazing.
I was like crazy excited about that race because it was my first official race for Bryn Mawr in the spring, which is like the main season for rowing as a coxswain. And so it was just all around really fun. And I felt like I had no clue what I was doing, but it was great.
Very cool. You've rowed obviously under Coach Carol Bauer, a legend here in the Bryn Mawr department. What was it like to row for Coach Carol back then?
It was good. Like she was my first major rowing coach. And so I didn't really know, like I knew she was a good coach. And I also had Gabby Chipolone, who's also like crazy, like Olympian, 2-time or 1-time, I don't know how many time gold medalist from East Germany. And so the like dynamic duo of them was just mind-boggling, knowing that like I had this Olympic gold medalist as my coach at like a Division III college. Was so cool to see. But I really think that by having Carol as my coach, it showed me that you can like push further and go as far as you really like want to go with it. And there were definitely times when like it wasn't the best experience in the world, but I think that comes along with any sport really. And I think that actually marks a good coach and a like promising athletic experience, because if everything was just peachy keen all the time, like nobody would be pushing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I think what's that saying, that growth happens on the edge of uncomfortability. That's not exactly it, but it's kind of that if you weren't uncomfortable on some of those occasions, you wouldn't be growing as an athletic person anyway. So very cool to hear. Yeah, we definitely love having her around. She helps push us forward in the department too. So I think we're kind of familiar with what you're talking about. So for those who again aren't as familiar with your career, you have built even an impressive post-Bryn Mawr rowing career, winning numerous medals at all kinds of different competitions and regattas. I'll let you talk about that. You're going to be way better at it than I am. But can you tell people a little bit about how you found your way in the sport after Bryn Mawr and how you continue to improve and build and just stay involved in the sport?
So I actually had like a crazy path during Bryn Mawr, and that was like not at school, like not in Bryn Mawr, but like outside of Bryn Mawr with rowing. So over the summers, I would go and I don't know how much you want to know, but I'll tell you. Why not? So over the summers, I would actually go and coach and row at a local boat club in New Jersey. And one like spring, I was coaching for a school there, and ended up that the head coach who I was coaching under professed his love for me during one of the regattas. And I was going to go coach with him that following summer. And I was like, well, that's not happening. And so I ended up, it was like April. And for anybody that knows colleges, like you have your summer planned in February. So it was April, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I had always had like this secret dream of going to the Olympics and like being on a national team. And so I was like, let's try. So I applied to pre-elite clubs and got into Vesper Boat Club in Philadelphia somehow. I had like a 1.5 coxing experience and 2.5 years rowing experience, and I got in and ended up going there that summer and living in Philadelphia, working at the Philly Zoo, raising baby turtles all summer. Not the most exciting job, I promise. And while I was there, though, I wanted to take the greatest advantage of what I had, because it was an amazing, prestigious club. And so I would cox the masters team, which is like age 27 and older, in the morning at 5 a.m. And then I cox pre-elite at 7 a.m. And then I go work all day, and then I cox pre-elite in the afternoon. But it was the master's program that actually got me into my career post-Bryn Mawr, because I ended up coxing so I went to one of their national races that summer, and this woman hopped in my boat. Never met her in my life. And the coach was like, listen to whatever she says. I was like, okay, great. And of course, Bryn Mawr women tend to be a little bit more headstrong. And so she was talking to me the entire like practice up. I'm like, can you just shut up and let me do my job? And then we came down the race course. I don't even remember what place we came in, but she was like, oh, that was really good. Can I have your name and number? I was like, yeah, sure. I'll cox for Vesper again. And a couple weeks later, I got an email from her like, hey, I'm the adaptive national team coach, and I want you to come to a couple development camps because you were really good. And so that's actually how I got my start with the national team and para sport. It was totally random, went to a couple development camps, and then in 2010, right after graduating Bryn Mawr, I actually made my first national team as a rower. And funny story is, she was actually a Bryn Mawr grad too.
No way. That's
yeah, and we didn't know that until I had made the team.
Really?
Yeah.
She rowed at Bryn Mawr too?
No, she didn't row. She played field hockey at Bryn Mawr.
Really?
And learned to row later on in life. She ended up a couple years after like stopping coaching the national team, and a new person took over, which is how my career kind of blossomed. But yeah, so it was kind of crazy.
That's amazing. Who was this alum? Just for history's sake, who was talking about?
Karen Lewis.
Okay, very cool. That's awesome.
I don't know what year she graduated, but yeah.
We'll have to find out. I'll put a little note in, but that's so cool. That's such a world kind of story thing.
It was kind of crazy. And you know, it's like, it was that same type of thing where like, sometimes you don't get along, and I only had her for 1 year.
Yeah.
So in 2011 and 12, I actually didn't make the boat. And yeah, I wasn't very pleased or happy with that, but we can get into that in a little bit if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Well, how did your career continue to progress?
Well, now that you ask, I guess we can get into that. So I went to New Zealand in 2010 with the team, and we came in 6th place. And it was basically like para rowers were nothing at that point. Like para sport, their first time in the Paralympic Games was in 2008, was rowing's first time in the games. And we didn't even like get the sunglasses that the national team had gotten. And we were promised them, and we got to pick out which ones we wanted, and then we just never got them. Like we didn't get the boat we wanted. Like major things like that were like, people, this isn't a thing right now. So then in 2011, I actually tried out again and didn't make the boat that time. Tried out against the same person and didn't make the boat. She made it, and I was kind of like, well, what can I do better? And so I ended up moving out to, so first I moved down to kind of like the Princeton area and trained out a Mercer Boat Club, not with the national team, but with the Masters team. And then I ended up actually moving out to California. It was like Monday, and I was like, Mom, I'm moving out to California from New Jersey. She's like, okay, Jenny, when are you going to do this? And I was like, well, I told the coach I'd be there next Wednesday. She's like, okay, Jenny, do you have some place to live? And I was like, I found this month to month on Craigslist.
Nice.
She's like, do you have a job? No, Mom. How are you going to get out there? Well, I was going to drive the 1998 Toyota Sienna van. Okay, Jenny. So needless to say, they drove me out in a more recent car. It took us 3 days to go cross country, like 16 hours a day. They drove me out. They flew back, and I stayed in California and lived in California for 9 months, just training with Marin Boat Club Masters team, who were really good. Learning all about boat feel, boat movement, and just really honing my skills. And working like so many different odd jobs at the time. But what's
one of them? Can you tell us one of them?
I can tell you like the 5 that I had at once. So my main job was I was a barista.
Nice.
At like a local like high-end coffee bar. So actually Robin Williams would frequent it. That was like my claim to fame. Nice. That's my claim to fame, not like the rowing thing.
Yeah.
I served Robin Williams a veggie burger with no onions.
Nice. You can hang that on the wall right next to your medal.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I had an awkward encounter with him too. It was like my last day working at the coffee shop. And I was like, it's now or never, Jenny. Just talk to him. Because I think he'd be very interesting person. Like I knew he was in the mental health world, and so was I. And I was like, this would be really interesting to talk about. And so he got up, and I was on my lunch break. He got up to leave, and gentleman next to him got up to leave, and they both started walking out. And I was like, now's the time. You're going to do this. So I was like, excuse me, sir. And both of them turned around. Him and the gentleman behind him turned around. And I was like, you. And I pointed to the other gentleman, and he walked on his way.
All right.
So I never got to talk to Robin Williams.
You gave it a shot.
I tried. But yeah, so after that, I actually applied to camp again in 2012 and went to camp and didn't make it again. And it was just devastating to me.
I'm sure. Yeah.
To the point that like I found out I didn't make it, and I was driving out of the parking lot back to the host family house and realized that I was going like 50 miles per hour in a parking lot. And I stopped and I was like, just get back to the host family house. My dad actually flew down to drive me back to New Jersey the next day because I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So that was totally devastating. And then it probably took a good like 2-3 months of me being like, what am I doing with my life? You know, like I have a degree in mathematics from Bryn Mawr, and I'm like wallowing in my own tears right now. And I had moved to Michigan for a little bit to continue rowing, and like I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so then that fall actually was head of the Charles, and I went to head of the Charles again, and like Coxed a team from Australia that year or something. But I saw 2 of my blind friends there, and I started talking to them, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to get back into high performance training. And they're like, Jenny, stop. And I was like, what? They're like, we can hear you smiling right now. And I had no clue that I was actually smiling. It was one of those moments. And when they told me that, I was like, I am smiling. And that's when I knew that I had to get back into it. So I promptly went back down to New Jersey, actually went to the Princeton Training Center this time, coxed for the Mercer Masters, and then walked up to the head coach of the women's rowing national team, Tom Tarhar. Walked up to him and said, hi, my name's Jenny. I was on the team in 2010 and I'm ready to get back on the horse. Can I ride the launch with you? Like, who does that? He's like walking into his office. And I just was like, what the hell? Why not? And so I did. And he's like, sure. So I rode the launch with him that fall. And then that following spring, the rowing moved down to Oklahoma. There's a training center down there. So I moved to Oklahoma. The coach left, and new coach took over at Community Rowing in Boston, and that's kind of like how I would say like the second half of my rowing career, where it really blossomed. So that was like all in 2 years after college.
That's amazing. That's amazing that there's that much crammed into it, and that's a lot of resiliency you had to show to kind of bounce back and get back on the horse.
It's not easy at all, but like I feel like when you have a passion and just love for something, like I tell people all the time, it's not about the 3-minute race, the 7-minute race. Like it's not about the silver medal that I won in 2016 at the Paralympic Games. It's about the training and the journey along the way, because like literally you race for 3 minutes down a course or 7 minutes down a course. And you put in hours upon hours upon hours of work to get there.
For sure. Yeah. So you've like we've said, you've won, you've been a lot of places.
Yeah.
What's maybe, if you had to pick a highlight from kind of that second half of your career, what's something that pops into your mind right away?
I think the highlight would have to be, I mean, other than of course getting the medal, but that was actually more bittersweet than anything. And I'll tell you why in a second, but I think the highlight would have to, there's so many, but getting named to the team, the Paralympic team in 2016, and actually like being told I was on the team, because I had learned to like, you don't take anything for granted. Nothing is ever a given. Like you're never just like in the boat as a coxswain. And so uh, getting named to the team that year was so surreal. I remember going out on the patio and just crying on the phone to my mom. And it was just like, okay, here we go. But I said that the podium was bittersweet because during the first stroke of the race, like I said, you never take anything for granted. Well, my boat took the first stroke and the speaker in the stern went out of the boat, and I'm in the bow, and the bow speaker didn't go out. So I could hear the bow speaker still, but I didn't know that the stern speaker wasn't working the entire race. And so for people that don't know rowing, that's kind of like you have two people rowing one cadence and two people rowing another. And like you're tuned to like into each other, but when they don't know that the speaker's out, when the bow people don't know the speaker's out, and the stern people don't know that the bow people can't hear me or can hear me, it's just totally discombobulated. And when it comes down to tenths of a second, hundredths of a second, like that completely matters.
Yeah, for sure.
So we ended up coming in second by 2 seconds that year. And it was just like devastating because you come off the water and your stroke seat's like, I couldn't hear you the entire race. And you're like, I put in like 10 years of work for this moment and you couldn't hear me.
Yeah.
And then you're standing on the podium and it's like, well, you know, didn't come for what we asked for, but we got something pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So yeah, but then,
cool.
And then after that, I made the team again in 2017, 2018. And then actually my coach resigned and new coach took over and brought her coxswain with her from her college. And I ended up not making the team again in 2019. And so I really don't know what the future lies. You know, I was thinking of trying out again in 2020 and then the pandemic happened. And I couldn't say one way or another what's going to happen right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I want to try out because I love it so much and I'm so passionate about it, but it's also a lot. You give up so much to do this.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and it's been a long time.
Yeah, it has. It has. It's definitely a career you can be proud of no matter what you decide going forward. So yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. Transitioning a little bit, I know you are very outspoken and very into kind of advocacy for some of the causes that you really hold dear to your heart. One of them, as we talked already about, is para athletics and para rowing. And you've talked about how you get involved with that. How has that become such a part of your life, and why is that so important to you? And can you talk a little bit about why it should be so important to everyone else?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of it, I mean, there's kind of two parts to that answer. So one of the parts would be that, you know, I myself have a mental health disability and didn't really realize that until, well, knew that I had mental health challenges in college and like got them sort of under control throughout my time at Bryn Mawr. But then didn't realize it could be like considered a disability until probably 7 years after I graduated from Bryn Mawr, after I had been in the disability world for a long time. And so I think that in some way, shape, or form, I kind of felt like I was able to relate to people with disabilities a little bit more. But also what I loved about it was that I loved kind of being able to branch the disability world to quote unquote the able-bodied world or the non-disabled world. That's one of my favorite things to do because, you know, especially in athletics, because people with disabilities are just as athletic, work just as hard, put in just as many, if not even more hours than people without disabilities to get that same medal. And it's like, I didn't like see a difference in a way because you're putting in just as much time. You're doing all of the same things. And in fact, it was a lot greater of a challenge for me because it was building, like I said, back in 2010, nobody cared about para rowing. It was like, para rowing what? And then we started winning medals in 2014 and they were like, para rowing, huh? And then like it started kind of gaining momentum. And for me, that was the coolest part, was just really being when that branch happened, when those like connections were made, and just seeing people realize, oh, this is like intense and this is like legitimate. It's not just like people like running around and getting a participation award. It's legitimately competing, and it's the same with like Special Olympics, Paralympics, and Olympics. It's legitimately people competing for an award, and working hard and training. And so I think that's my favorite part. And like the silver medal is what really allows me to branch that. You know, I give it to people and they're like, oh, you went to the Paralympics, huh? It's actually really cool. So I sound so like weird saying this, but I was signing autographs. Um, and we were showing medals and I was next to one of the Olympic gold medalists. And she was to my right and they were coming from my left. And so they're like, oh, you were in the Paralympics, huh? And I'm like, yeah, shake the medal. And so all of the Rio medals, each different color makes a different noise. So blind and visually impaired athletes know what, like, have an awareness of the color. And so she shook the medal and they're like, whoa. And this was like some high school kids. And they're like, whoa, that's so cool. And then they go up to the Olympic medalist and they start shaking it and it doesn't shake. And they were so disappointed. And I was like, I mean, it's just like, it can be cool too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I remember when you brought your medal on campus one time.
Yeah.
I do that same thing. It's such a cool thing. It's something you don't really think about, unfortunately. Yeah. And you learn about that and it's like, man, that is so cool. And so you need to be that inclusive to think about something like that. So it's really cool. Little sidetrack. Try to sneak this question in. So you aren't necessarily as familiar at Bryn Mawr rowing with those with disabilities, and they have all different shapes and sizes. How did you have to adjust your coxing style and your kind of technique to be more inclusive of the people you were rowing with? What comes to mind to me is you were talking about the speaker kind of failing, and it brought the idea to me. I wonder if you've ever rowed with maybe deaf people, and how do you get your commands out, and how, just in general, how have you had to kind of shape your career to kind of be more inclusive and fit in that Paralympic model?
Yeah, so I'll start off just per your example, but deaf is not a classification in Paralympics, actually.
Okay, all right, I apologize.
No, but that doesn't mean that I haven't coxed deaf people, or people who are hard of hearing. With that, we actually use little buzzers. And so the person might have a little buzzer on their leg. And so like one click would be stop rowing. 2 clicks would be start rowing. Like that kind of thing. Or you can like smack the boat and they feel the vibration in the boat, or you can use hand symbols. Like I've learned this is ready in sign language. So we used to be like ready, row, and just kind of make up different symbols because sign language, I guess, doesn't have many symbols for rowing. So that would be like a main adaptation actually, that I've done. In general, coxing people with disabilities has made me such a better coxswain because I've become so much more aware of what I'm saying and just more specific, really. Like I use this example, but it's like you go say, oh, go grab that oar over there. And right now I'm pointing off screen. But if someone with a visual impairment like couldn't see me pointing, they wouldn't know where. So it's just like that kind of awareness. Or like previously, a person with visual impairment had to be blindfolded during a race. And so I would have to tell them where they were at in the race, where the other boats were, which is actually beneficial for everybody in rowing. Like there really is no downside to rowing with people with disabilities. Right. Or coxing people with disabilities. If anything, it just like makes you so much better and so much more knowledgeable of what you're actually saying.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate that perspective and you kind of taking the time to educate me and hopefully some other people too on that.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, another kind of advocacy topic that you've already mentioned a little bit, but something that's important to you is mental health.
Mhm.
Can you, I kind of want to give you just some time to talk about that, why that's important to you, the kind of message you'd want to get out to people about that.
Yeah, so actually, while I was at Bryn Mawr, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and pretty severe version of it. And it was kind of life changing just being diagnosed with it because I had finally felt like somebody understood me, and understood where I was coming from. Because my entire freshman year at Bryn Mawr, I was kind of known as like the weird or crazy person on campus, and like my hallmates kind of were like, "Oh, hey, Jenny," and I'm like, "I'm really nice, I promise." Like, I just don't know what's going on in my brain right now. And so when I was finally diagnosed my sophomore year, it's just a relief. And then throughout like Bryn Mawr, I was actually like getting therapy and going to see psychiatrists and put on medication, and it changed my life. It really like at first I was so afraid of the stigma associated with it, and like sorry, the dog's barking, but it changed my life for the better in the sense that um, you go from sort of like in your own little bubble to finally feeling and experiencing what you felt like before the OCD ever came on, back when you were like 5 or 6 years old, and able to focus more. And so I think just the fact that I sought out treatment at Bryn Mawr was so difficult because of that stigma. But I advocate for it so much now because I think it's just extremely important. And, you know, there's always the skeletons in the closet that people have. And for some, it could be physical disability that you can see, like they use a wheelchair. For some, it could be a speech impediment, whatever it might be, a learning disability. For me, it was mental health disability. And just by going to treatment, going to therapy, and constantly working on it, you know, it's become something I'm actually proud of rather than something that I'm ashamed of or something I don't know about. And if you were to just meet me right now, you'd be like, oh, she's cool. And actually, I only told my national team rowing coach of 6 years or whatever it was, I only told her that I had OCD this past summer or fall, maybe. And she was like, what? But I want to speak about it and I want to advocate about it because I was able to sort of work, learn how to cope with it, and learn how to manage it. And I think it's so important for people to do that. And like, I don't think anybody should be worried about what others think of them. Or like, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, like there is no shame in seeking out help, nothing, or even just talking to someone, like going to your coach, going to a friend or teacher, professor, whatever it might be, and just being like, I have no clue what's going on, but I know this isn't right.
For sure.
Um, is so important. And like, I mean, I think that everybody can work on it. And more people go to therapy than you think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing that and taking the time to kind of share your voice on that. It's very important for people to hear that, I know. So transitioning very ungracefully, I'm sure, but transitioning slightly into kind of your professional life post Bryn Mawr,
Mhm.
up to outside of rowing, and how has your career kind of blossomed and changed, and what's that been like?
So I actually have a degree in mathematics from Bryn Mawr, but you might have no clue based on my history since graduating Bryn Mawr. Because I decided that I was going to go the path of rowing. I actually ended up only just working random jobs. I was going to go into veterinary medicine after Bryn Mawr, and then worked at a vet hospital and realized that I like speaking more with the owners than interacting with the animals. So I was like, probably not the right profession for me. And then I was going to go into orthopedic surgery, worked at an orthopedic surgery center out in California, and realized that I liked interacting more with people than just treating people. Like I really just like that human interaction. So then I was going to go into physical therapy, um, and all doing rowing while like doing all of this and other odd jobs. But ended up working at the boathouse for a while, taking like pre-physical therapy courses online and everything throughout the years. But by the time I applied to physical therapy school, my freshman and sophomore year prerequisite courses were out of date. They were past the 10-year mark. And so therefore, all my applications got rejected from physical therapy school. So I was like, well, I would have to go post back and spend another 2 years in school and then spend another 3 or 4 years in school for my PT, doctorate in PT. There have to be other things that I'm interested in. And I'm so interested in disability and disability rights and advocacy. In fact, I work with I lead a disability advocacy movement right now called Link 20 for the younger generation of advocates, totally giving myself a plug right now and very pleased with it. So my brother, who works at an unnamed school as director of undergraduate admissions, actually told me about Master's of Public Administration degree. And I applied to one school last fall and got into one school last fall. And so I'm now getting my Master's of Public Administration and looking to work in nonprofit work or the public sector coming up. In addition to my like beautiful acting career that I'm like planning because it's a secret dream of mine as well.
Awesome. Well, that's amazing. That's awesome. I hope your studies are going really well. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the foundation you're working for right now. I saw in another article, I'll make sure it gets posted for other people to read, but you talk a little bit about some of the things you've been able to do with your foundation in response to some disability issues. I saw that you kind of helped the Major League Baseball change their injured list name to be called the disabled list, and for obvious reasons.
Switch that.
Yeah.
Change the disabled list to be called the injured list.
Right. Yeah. That's what I meant. Yep. But you've been responsible or kind of helped out with that foundation through like doing cool stuff like that. I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit more about some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. So Link 20 actually got started through is it okay if I name the foundation?
Absolutely. Plug yourself away.
Okay, cool. Well, so it's not really plugging myself anymore, but I'll explain that. So it got started with the Ruderman Family Foundation in Boston. And I started out as a member of the movement, actually, and then took an internship with the foundation at age 30. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? I'm taking an internship at age 30. I was in Bulgaria at a World Rowing Championships when I took it. So I took the internship and that kind of snowballed into full-time or part-time, then full-time position. But while I was doing that, we actually worked through, you mentioned the Major League Baseball, changing the name from disabled list to injured list. We wrote a letter to to one of the people that worked there. I don't know if it was the commissioner. I had just come on board at that time. And they wrote back 2 months later and we're like, yeah, we're going to change this. You're right. And then I brought up to them about the unequal Paralympic medal payout because I got 1/5 of the prize money that an Olympian got for their silver medal. And like 3,500 that I got compared to 15 grand that an Olympian got. Just because you say 1/5 and people don't get it. And then it's like, oh, so I brought that up to Link 20. We were one of, not the only advocacy company or team movement pushing towards the equal medal payout, but sort of one of the tipping forces, because all of a sudden now with Link 20, you have 500 plus advocates saying, we want this changed. And so in 2018, we worked on that. And then end of 2018, the payout got equalized and it was actually retroactive towards the games in 2018. Recently, we have worked with Accessible Air Transportation and been in contact with American Airlines to work on their accessibility. We've been working on accessible web. We did a major project in honor of Americans with Disabilities Act turning 30, we basically created an interactive accessible map of the United States, and then have an advocate talking about the ADA in each state, and have a fun fact about disability, sort of accessibility, disability from each state. So we're doing just like really cool things with it. And it's really neat to be able to sort of be at the forefront of this movement, because the disability rights movement is like taking steam right now. And, you know, I mean, watch out. Like, I mean, you saw ASL for the Pledge of Allegiance at the inauguration.
Yeah.
Like, so it's super exciting. And actually, the reason I say I'm not promoting myself anymore by saying Ruderman Foundation is because recently Link 20 started a transition over to the National Council on Independent Living as sort of our parent kind of organization. And so I just started working with Nickel this past week, actually.
Cool. Well, congrats on that. It's got to be really neat to be kind of tip of the spear on such, like you said, a movement that's really lighting on fire and taking the country by storm. So it's really cool. I've taken up so much of your time. I just have like one more question.
Go for it. I'm having
the whole reason we kind of got connected is because you recently did an interview with Emily Spiegel, who were on another episode of this. But what was it like to kind of connect with Emily, an alum from a different time than you were here? And what's the rowing alumni network like for you former Owls? And just kind of talk about that experience a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that it's just connecting with Emily and other alums has been amazing. And I only recently started because of my OCD. I actually stayed away from like connecting with alums because it would trigger my OCD for a while. And then I came to Boston, and Bryn Mawr was having its like last alumni race, or having its last Seven Sisters race one year.
Yeah.
And I somehow was lucky enough to be able to cox the boat for the alumni team, and met so many alumni from the Boston area and like we've hung out after. And I actually wish that I had reached out to them sooner, because the network, just by saying, oh yeah, I was a Bryn Mawr rower, even just saying, oh, I went to Bryn Mawr, and then like, I mean, I ran into somebody at a farmer's market who was like a graduate in, I'm totally going to butcher this, but like 1964 or something, from Bryn Mawr. And she had on a Bryn Mawr college sweatshirt, and I was like, oh, hey, do you know Bryn Mawr? And she's like, oh yeah, I went there. I graduated in like whenever. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. What color were you? Like that kind of stuff. And it was just so cool. And like, it's so cool being able to have not only the Bryn Mawr Alumni Network, but the Bryn Mawr Athletic Alumni Network too. And it's not only like rowing, it's just like, if you say you played a sport at Bryn Mawr, you're like, oh, cool, what'd you play? Or what'd you do? And so you feel this automatic connection. And then rowers, I like to think I can get along with most people. So we've become pretty good friends, actually. And Emily and I have become good friends. And like, it's just been awesome. Because she and I never overlapped. I didn't know her.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And now I know her really well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great. I'm so glad you two got connected and were able to put that article together. And yeah, it's great to have you as part of our alumni network. Hopefully one of these days we'll get to do another homecoming. We'll be able to have you back on campus and get to say hi in person. Yep, fingers crossed. Now, why don't you give a quick, maybe 1 minute, what's on tap for you in the future, and let people know how they can follow your progress and what you're up to.
Definitely. So real quick, what's on tap for me in the future is aiming to graduate with my master's in public administration, push the Link 20 movement to new heights and the disability advocacy movement to new heights. And other than that, I have no clue. I wanted to get into acting. I've wanted to get into public speaking. I have so many like dreams. I want to go to the Paralympics as a downhill ski racing guide. Like, it's just like, there are just so many things that I want to do. And so what's up for the future? Well, I'll graduate my master's degree. That's about all I can say right now.
Perfect. Well, we will be very excited to follow your story and
yes. And you can
see where
follow me.
you go. Yeah, go for it.
You can follow me. I'm going to give myself another plug. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, although I mostly do Instagram. And it's J, the first 4 letters of my last name, SICH, J Sich, and then Rockin without the G.
Perfect. It's one of my favorite handles that follows the athletics account. So it's good. I know exactly what you're talking about. So cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, student athletes can reach out to you, DM you if they want to reach out and say hi.
Absolutely. Feel free. And if you have any questions or you want to connect or anything, like if you have a dream to go to the Olympics and you're like, I'm in athletics at Bryn Mawr College, how am I going to go to the Olympics? Like, connect, because
yeah, for sure.
You know, like people are there to support you. So
perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for being such an ardent Owls alum and just being so connected to us and for showing your love for the Owls. We really appreciate it. It's
definitely
for me personally to connect with you and catch up. It's been a lot of fun getting to know you and talk with you today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.